Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
Great pleasure and privilege to have a chance to talk to Barry Supple. Barry, I always start by asking when and where people are born.
Okay. Well, I was born in the then called London Hospital in Whitechapel in 1930, 27th of October 1930. And my parents then lived in Whitechapel.
Well, the next question I always ask is about ancestors. I think in your autobiography you go back to your grandparents, certainly.
Yes.
But some people, like Sir John Gurdon, went back to the Norman Conquest. But go back as far or as little as you like and tell me something about your roots.
Okay. Well, alas, I can't go back any further than grandparents. And in particular, my mother and father's grandfathers. I don't know anything about their mother's origins. Both sets of grandparents came from Poland, probably perhaps in the late 1890s, the other one certainly in 1905. That was my mother's father, a refugee, as so many people were, from conscription during the Russian-Japanese War. Oddly enough, I know a little bit about their geographic origin because I'm visiting Poland in 2 weeks' time to look for the first time at the two villages which are involved in those. Eastern Poland. They came over with large families, and let's say many siblings that were young when they came. And the families were very close, so I knew all these siblings and their descendants. So it was a pretty large family, 7, 8, 9 siblings in each. Yes.
What did they do? What were they doing in Poland?
Well, I don't know about Poland because, like so many young people, I didn't ask the right questions when they were alive enough to give me the answers. My grandparents came over when they were young men, grandfathers came over when they were young men, and probably in their late teens, so they didn't have much record. They must have worked, but they didn't have much record there. When they came to this country, one of them, my mother's father, actually worked rather casually, first of all as the census of 1911 described him, as cigarette box manufacturer. He was just a casual labourer, and he subsequently went on to the higher reaches of grocery by pushing a barrow full of bananas in Ridley Road and selling bananas. My father's father, I believe, worked as a tailor, but his sight grew very bad, and I don't believe he worked much in his middle and later years.
They came to East London, didn't they?
They both sets came to East London and Whitechapel. I have the addresses, but I've never tracked down the places. Until my mother's and father's generation, that's where the family were, and then we moved to they moved to the leafy suburbs of Hackney, as they then were, in the late 30s, or middle to late 30s. I don't remember my origins in my first years in Whitechapel, but do remember Dalston, part of Hackney, as it is, from about 1938 on, so when I was 8 or 9. But the whole family moved. My mother's family was much the stronger element in all this. The whole family moved, and we lived with my grandmother and others of my mother's siblings before they were married. But my father and mother got married in 1928 and stayed within that extended family as a place of residence. Indeed, with one of my father's only sister lived with us as well, so it was a very large household. Very East European, I suppose. Yes.
Were they Jewish?
Yes.
Both on both sides?
On both sides were Jewish, yeah.
But any of them sort of pastors or whatever?
No, none of them was either a rabbi or particularly religious, really. Whether they were observant or not, I think rather depends on the definition one has. They were not either observant or particularly learned, but they did observe the 2 or 3 major holidays which social pressure, no doubt, and community momentum obliged them to. The Day of Atonement and the New Year mostly, and Passover. But I don't recall the details because I became very irreligious But I don't believe that they observed in any great detail. I mean, systematically. It was just a question of attending the synagogue when you ought to. But and I was bar mitzvahed at the age of 13, and marriages took place in synagogues. But you know as much about this or more about this than I do. I mean, it's an anthropological function of a social and community ambience rather than belief. Really.
Well, we'll come further to that later. And your parents, tell me about them.
Yes, my father was a tailor. He was born in 1905. My mother, before she got married, was a seamstress in a furrier. She was in the fur factory. She was born in 1907. They met somehow. Again, I never asked the question. I should have done. Presumably in the East End, and I have one or two very nice photos of them as a young couple, and they got married in 1928. My father stayed the rest of his life as what was then called a journeyman tailor, which was quite interesting to me because he was part of the structure of industry, which again you're familiar with, which was a putting out system almost, small workshops in private houses. My mother ceased to work when she got married. And my father remained a tailor all his life, except for a brief period when he tried to be an entrepreneur and failed in the 50s, well, the late 40s, 50s. But other than that, yes, he was in the tailoring trade, like so many people of his background and culture. Yeah.
Tell me about their characters and how it may have influenced you. It's a huge subject, but
yeah, no, that's okay. My father was a relaxed and very intelligent person who would have benefited greatly from the education he didn't receive. In fact, he left school at the age of 12 and commuted to work from Reading in the First World War by train every day. But he was always ambitious for learning. He was a fairly strongish character who fostered his two sons. I have a brother, and was sceptical in terms of religion and politics as well. He was quite left wing. He was an active member of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, and that I suppose had a slight influence on me, although there were periods when it had a reactionary influence. One reacted against it. But he was a man whom I grew greatly to respect. A little bit more perhaps in retrospect than at the time, but even at the time, the feeling that he was a strong personality whom I admired and who was tolerant of his sons and very kind. My mother was very maternal, a very Jewish mother, although it's said that Jewish fathers make the best Jewish mothers. That's another story. She was a very powerful woman in that sense, taking after her own mother. She was the eldest of 8 children. And like her mother, was sort of held the family together in the sense that she took a lot of decisions, I assume, when I was quite young, and had fairly strong opinions, but she was a loving person and very kind, and perhaps much more demonstrative than my father, who was more, as we used to say in those days, more English, whatever that means. I mean, less patently ethnically Jewish, I suppose. But I suppose you could say they did cosset me. I was the elder of the two. I was the firstborn, and in fact I was the only child for 8 years, which I think was probably a pretty powerful influence on the relationship. And they were full of admiration for me, I'm sure, and supported me a lot. So they were rather proud of whatever achievements I managed to attain at school and at university. And on the whole, I don't think I have anything to complain about in terms of my relationship with them, because there was a very substantial degree of toleration on their part, I mean, given the period we were living in. And I suppose in the end, I admired my father more than I admired my mother. I admired both, I loved both, but my father was much more of a sort of benchmark of intelligent approach to the world, a keen, perhaps even sceptical view of political atmosphere around us, more encouraging of the studying side of things, more encouraging of reading, of buying me books when I was an early teenager, things of this sort. So on the whole, I think the influences were pretty powerful, and certainly they were benchmarks. But as I grew older, and even now, I still feel that my father is the one I'm sort of want to impress. And I'm sorry he's not around to see what happened, because he died when I was still at the University of Sussex before I came to Cambridge and got the chair that he would no doubt have felt very powerfully about, and then became the master of the college. So at that point I felt sad that he wasn't around, and my mother, I was sad too, but I think that was another sort of more emotional thing. Yeah.
What's your first memory? Not sort of trees waving above your pram memory, but anything very concrete. Do you have a?
Well, I do have one quite early one, which is very powerful. I've often tried to interpret it. It's of my mother falling off a roundabout on holiday somewhere, no doubt Westcliff on Sea or Walton on the Naze is where we went. Walton on the Naze, and I think the reason it's powerful is that at that time I had very mixed feelings about it. I think she must have done something that I didn't like, or denied me something that I wanted, and because I was both anguished and slightly pleased at what I took to be punishment. So I do have a memory, and I mean I have a memory which was obviously not true, of seeing her flying through the air. She obviously couldn't have thrown through the air, but so I do have that, and I have, for the life of me, can't remember, can't identify when that was, but it would have been before the Second World War, and probably about 1937 or 8, so it's about 7.
You were about 7?
Yeah, it must have been, or perhaps even 6, I can't quite remember. Other than that, there's a haziness, because I also have other memories. I do remember the time when I first learnt that death was inevitable, because an aunt of mine, who was one of the rapscallion siblings of my mother, well, perhaps the only one, informed me of this fact when I was a child. And again, it must have been before the First World War. Well, it would have been the First World War. I must have been perhaps 6 or 7. And I was devastated by it, and my parents were very, very upset at it, and so they berated this aunt, who was called Frances, and we'll hear more about her later perhaps. And that was quite strong, both because of the incident of learning this fact and also of seeing my parents' reaction and their defensiveness about it. So those are two things. I have one or two other family, mostly concerned with this rather riotous family, because all these siblings sort of lived together until quite a late period, and certainly when I was young, we were all in the same house, so there were lots of interactions with different sorts of people. But those are memories. I mean, physical memories I have. Yeah.
Where was your first school?
I went to a school called Sigden Road, which is in Hackney, elementary school, and I suppose there were about 30 or 40 boys in the class. It must have been a boys' club. I've never thought of that, but there was a boys' club. I mean, the school picture I still have is entirely boys. And I do have a memory there of the odour of the no doubt Lifebuoy soap that our middle class teacher, Mr. Griffiths, whose name sticks with me still, must have used, who was very much a middle class person, very impressive in his suit and tie and everything. So I went to Sigden Road Elementary School until wartime came, and the evacuation, when I was 9 at just under 9 at the outbreak of war.
And you were evacuated? I
was immediately evacuated with, I don't know, and again I never did ask my parents. I was immediately evacuated with groups, but whether they were the groups from the school or an assembly of the, and I fancy the latter, because I went with my 2 young aunts. I had an aunt who is 5 years older than I, and another one who was about 7 years older than I, because of this elongation of the number of siblings that my mother had, she being the eldest. And we were evacuated together, so it couldn't have been the school alone. And I do remember that very pungently. I was evacuated a number of times. The very first time was in the panic at the immediate outbreak of war, when we came to Hochwald very near here, where many years later I taught a WAA class as a graduate student. Hockwat's a tiny, tiny village in Norfolk. And we weren't there for very long. We came back, and then we were evacuated again in 1940 when things grew, when the war effort grew very bad. Again with my aunts, and that was for a longer period, because at that point my mother with my then very young brother joined us, and her mother came, and an aunt, and we set up home in Witney.
Witney,
Yeah.
Oxford.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, we first of all went to a village called Hayley, but when my mother came, we all rented a house.
Do you remember, this is countryside, isn't it, really?
It is countryside, yes. I discovered bluebells and things of that sort, and fell into a pond and all sorts of...
Were you beginning to have hobbies of any kind? Were you collecting things?
At that stage, I don't believe so. I know that I joined the Sea Cadets as a sort of thing. And
in Witney? No.
In Witney, yes, indeed. In Witney, yes.
The sea is a bit of a distance. But,
I know. Well, I think in those days each of the forces had a sort of young cadet thing, and I joined the Sea Cadets. I think mostly because they had this. I mean, it was just a plain blue sweater and a polished brass buckle belt. And in fact, the belt was the only bit of uniform we were issued with, and a hat. But I didn't have. No, I don't recall having hobbies in that sense. Well, I collected chestnuts and things of that sort, and rose hips for syrup and all the things that actively one did, but not hobbies. No.
Do you remember? You're now what about between 9 and 12, that sort of age? Is that right?
Yes. Between 9 and 12, essentially the wartime. Yes, that grows more intense as the years and the memory.
Do you remember any of the teachers at that school? This was at Witney, presumably.
At Witney, no. The only teaching incident I recall, but that was very powerful, was the headmaster, because two of the students were children of the headmaster. And no doubt, in order to show his independence, he caned them once in front of the school for some misdemeanour that I know nothing about, the most extraordinary thing. But I don't remember any of the teachers, but I do remember the same headmaster. My parents told me, saying to them that I ought to prepare myself because there's a chance I might get into Christ Hospital. But I suspect what he was saying was that I ought to study hard, and that's the sort of thing that could happen. Anyway, but Christ Hospital sort of loomed as a missed opportunity in those early years. That was in Witney, 1940-41. We then came back to London in 41, and I was evacuated again subsequently when I, quote, won the scholarship, end quote, at the age of 11, and went to King's Lynn, where my school was then evacuated. It was London School, but it was evacuated to King's Lynn.
Was it?
Yes.
So winning the scholarship is 11 plus, is it?
11 plus, yeah.
So
that was in 41. So I went to school in 42. I went to the school in 42, yes.
And this is well-known school?
Well, it was very well known. It was Hackney Downs Grammar School for Boys. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Of course.
Yes. Well, there we are. I joined Harold Pinter and all the others.
Right.
Yes. And that was then evacuated. Although I didn't meet Harold then, because he wasn't evacuated to King's Lynn. He joined the school. I don't know quite how it happened. When by the time we got back to London in 43. So I was evacuated there, and I, had one or two memories of the school. We were billeted on another grammar school, so we joined their classes. And I remember getting into terrible trouble because I argued that Paris was spelled P-A-R-E-E because that's how it was pronounced in French. I shudder to recall this, and I know that I was very obstinate about the spelling. And I was there for a year, and made one or two friends who I've re-established contact with, because Hackney Downs Grammar School for Boys is one of the few state schools that has a website and a good magazine. It's called Clothesline. It's a Clove Club. And I've re-established contact with a number of people throughout. In fact, next week we're being visited by somebody I was at school with from America. We're all going over to see another friend who was head boy when I was deputy head boy.
It's interesting because your Wikipedia article was clearly written by someone from that school.
Well, yes.
Because it has references to an article in Clove or whatever it is.
Clove Lines, it's called, yes. Oh, that's right, I've seen that, and I wondered how they knew about that. Yes, I don't know who did that. Yeah.
Sort of looking at that whole grammar school period, I mean, a lot of the historians I've interviewed, like Keith Thomas and, of course, Habakkuk, and I didn't interview, but James Campbell and others all went to grammar schools during that period.
Yeah.
And they seem to have been fantastically good. Simon Schaffer is another example.
Yeah.
And so on. Was that your experience?
Well, it was, because at the time one doesn't appraise it quite in these ways, but certainly it, in retrospect, and to some extent obliquely at the time, it had very high quality, very good masters. I mean, of course, there's an interesting question about why the masters were so good, and it presumably was the lack of alternative avenues for people who were well educated. And they were brilliant. Yeah, two or three still lives very strongly in my memory.
Can you mention them?
Yes, one was Joe Brearley, who figures very strongly in Harold Pinter's memoirs, because he was an English master who was a theatrical enthusiast and directed Macbeth and then Romeo and Juliet, which were two outstanding productions with Harold in the leads. He was very relaxed. He never taught me, but I came into contact with him because of the drama, where I was quite active as well. And he was an exceptional man, because he transcended the ambience and structure of the school to encourage boys. He was intellectual. He was literary. He wanted boys to talk about poetry and drama, and he took us to interesting plays. I mean, he just was an activist. At another level, there was a man called Kenneth Houghton, who was a historian, who enthused me with the love for economic history, as it was. Even then, because it was one of the few schools which offered economic history rather than straight history at A level. And he was an influence in a slightly different way, much more scholarly, much more direct, much more cynical in his way, but powerful. And there was a fine and curious man called Percy Coffin, who was a geographer who retooled himself as an economist in order to teach us economics, because there wasn't an economist in the school. He was very nice. And there was a sadist called G, who was a biology teacher.
Pinning him down somewhat.
No, he wasn't sadist in that formal sense, but I mean he bullied boys. That's what I mean.
Good.
But it was a rich tapestry. There were lots of others masters I could talk about.
You mentioned drama, which you were active in.
Yeah.
Tell me about the sort of extracurricular activities, and drama was one of them. Drama
and sport, I suppose, were the two principal ones in my parents' school. I was very, very athletic. I mean, very committed to athletic activities in all seasons. So I ran, and I played cricket, and I played soccer for the school team. In fact, I played soccer at for the first team at a very early age, because I was a goalkeeper. And drama was the other important one, although I think it must only have materialised with this production Macbeth, which was in 1947, so I was 16, and really produced it, and it was a wonderful production in its way. We all dressed in Army Cadet Corps uniforms, because I belonged to the Cadet Corps, and Harold Pinter was Macbeth, and I was Malcolm, the young king. And I remember really saying to me, when I was still learning this trade, because Malcolm at some point, when told of it that his father's been murdered, has to say, "Oh, by whom?" in a sort of shrieking way. And I rather conversationally said, "Oh, by whom?" and really nicely mocked me as saying, "This is not a dinner party discussion." And Harold was a very strong Macbeth. And then the next year was this extraordinary production of Romeo and Juliet, which must have been one of the most, I mean, not because I was in it, but because the way Harold did it and what it was done must have been one of the most extraordinary.
When you say Harold did it, he was a producer?
He was Romeo.
Oh, really?
He was Romeo. I mean, he lifted it. I mean, it was really was the director. And I mean, I haven't seen all that many school productions, but I doubt if many were better, more full of impact than that, I should say. So Harold Pinter was Romeo. I was Mercutio, and the man, Henry Grimberg, who played Tybalt, whom I kill, of course, is the one who's coming over next week from New York
nice.
to have dinner with us and stay with us and go and see somebody else. So those are the two. The last year, 48 was my lower six. The last year, Harold and I wanted to do Hamlet for obvious reasons. He wanted to be Hamlet. And really refused. I mean, he said it wasn't appropriate, the timing wasn't right, it wasn't good. And Harold and I concocted a scheme which didn't come to fruition to do it privately and to do it independently. We were going to put on a production of Hamlet as schoolboys, nothing happened. And the novel I Will Never Write is about the middle-aged men in their 50s and 60s who come together finally to do it after 40 years.
It would be rather sweet and maybe done in a Pinteresque way.
Yes. Anyway, so that's those.
But, I mean, you've written about quite a lot, a certain amount about Harold and so on. But perhaps just for the visual record, what was he like at that age?
He was very precocious, and had a sort of pulling power on the rest of us because of this. He was precocious both in his person, his personal relationships with girls, for example, but also in his literary interests. He, in a sense, stimulated us to get concerned not only with conventional people like George Bernard Shaw, but Henry Miller and all this sort of thing. And he wrote a lot, and he was a very strong personality and very likable. He and I were great friends. And in fact, it was because we were great friends that our fathers became partners in a little tailoring business, which was the unsuccessful entrepreneurial venture I mentioned earlier. Harold had a strong temper. I remember once, to my eternal shame, claiming in the course of a hot argument that the reason he liked D.H. Lawrence was because of the dirty bits, and he almost felled me to the ground because of this silly comment. But we went on holiday together. We had a fine holiday once, as I suppose we were 16 or 17, in France, hitchhiking, where I almost persuaded him to take an interest in politics, but he was resistant to that. He did once join the Army Cadet Corps, no doubt with me, and could never swing the right arm with the correct leg as he was marching, so he didn't stay very long. Which was ironic, because later on he was a conscientious objector, but he did. But he was a good close friend, and I knew his parents very well because we lived near each other. And the aunt I referred to earlier, who told me about the existence of death, I think, Francis, at one point, he subsequently confessed to me many years later he had an affair with her. But earlier on, when my grandmother was killed by a bus, knocked over by a bus, in probably about 1947, it was 1947, and I couldn't therefore play in the school team the next day. The only way of communicating, and before emails or telephones, was to put a note through his door. And he told me subsequently that this note had come through his door saying, when grandmother was the basis for one of his early short stories, which he never published, but he wrote it up. And the other thing about him was that he was flamboyantly egocentric. The story I tell in the autobiography is going with him one day to Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, and to my embarrassment, his standing on a box and saying to the assembled crowd, "I'd like to read some poems by a very gifted and up-and-coming poet called Harold Pinter," and then reading some of his own poems, which is very
British, is it?
Yes. So, and he was a good sportsman as well, very strong, very powerful, and very active.
And you remained friends after school or not?
Well, we sort of did. What happened was that he left early and went to RADA. I went to college and didn't know much, but then when I got up here as at Cambridge as a graduate student, he was doing quite well as an actor, and I wrote to him, and we re-established a bit of contact, but not very much. And I didn't see him again properly until many years later, in 1958. I came back from America for a brief visit and went to see him and his then wife and child, and we sort of intermittently over the years did, but not very much. We re-established one contact many years later, perhaps we'll come to that, when I took exception to something that one of his biographers had written about me in his biography, quoting him wrongly, quoting Harold wrongly. But I mean, quoting Harold perhaps accurately, but wrongly.
You mentioned you tried to persuade him to be interested in politics. Were you interested in politics at this age?
Was I? Yes, I was. I think in a sort of schoolboyish intellectual way of being interested in reading Marxist literature or Plekhanov and things of this sort, and Lenin. I think, I was going to say partly through my father, that's not quite true, because I remember being slightly embarrassed when my father discovered that I was reading one of Plekhanov's things and thinking that I wanted to establish a bit of arm's length between me and his interests. But yes, I was sort of interested, not actively, I wasn't an activist in politics, but I was certainly left-wing and interested in the intellectual roots of that. Yeah.
And you mentioned you were bar mitzvahed. What age was that?
13.
13. So, just to return to the theme of religion, you very quickly said that you moved right away from this, but religion, for many people, whether you love it or especially if you hate it, like Dawkins, you spend your whole life involved with it.
Yes.
What has your position shaped, or how has it shaped over your life?
Well, I think there's an ambiguity which is, I was going to say, distinctive to Jews, but probably Muslims feel the same, which is the pull between one's reaction to the belief, which can often, as in my case, be very sceptical and rejectionist, on the one hand, and the community social ambience, a sort of ethnic element, which is pretty powerful. So that I quite early on, encouraged by my father, who once influenced me greatly by saying the Pope can't possibly believe all that, he's much too intelligent. Possibly influenced by my father, I was sceptical from a very early age. But never would have dreamt of not being bar mitzvahed, because that was what you did, and that's what happened in that circle. And the only Hebrew I ever learned was in order to read the section of the law that was relevant to the timing of the ceremony I was. And I never went to synagogue again, and I walked out of my brother's bar mitzvah because I had a soccer match that needed attending to. So over the years, I've never dissociated myself from the Jewish background, but never felt that I wanted to be identified as a religious. Well, I'm not a religious or Orthodox Jew, so I certainly haven't. The only times I've been back to a synagogue is when people got married and I wanted to attend the ceremony, and that's rare now. And certainly I was insistent, well, I didn't have to insist very strongly, that my own boys were not bar mitzvahed. I simply ignored it.
I was... well, there are two questions fighting in my mind. One was Supple, the name Supple. Has the name changed?
Yes, it was when they came in, no doubt because of some immigration officer, they were called Supple. No, not because, I know for certain it's not because of that. They were called Supple, S-O-P-E-L.
Yeah.
And the reason I know that is that I have done a bit of delving into the digital archives of the village from which they came, which is called Supple in near Białystok in northeastern Poland. And there were Sopols there.
I see.
And not only that, but I know they were the same Sopols because my father always used to tell me that all his uncles and his own father came, except one uncle, who stayed in Poland and was killed in the Holocaust. And sure enough, in the Yad Vashem archive, Yad Vashem is the archive of the Holocaust, there is a Supple in Sukowola who has his name, and who had two sons who were both killed then. So that was, but the name was corrupted very early on by common usage into Supple. And my mother, I should have said of my father that one of his traits, which I've inherited strongly, is an excessive respect for bureaucracy. And for administrative regulation.
This led you on to the lever human.
That's right. But the fact of that is that he registered me at birth as Supple, even though he was already called Supple. And my mother, she told me later, was outraged at this. She said it will give me an awful lot of trouble in future. He's known as Supple, but you put Supple on his birth certificate because my father felt he ought to conform. And sure enough, years later, I had to go to a notary public and certify that my name was Supple by common usage and mark document A, document B. But curiously, even the American immigration authorities accepted that. I always thought that they would throw me out immediately as a Russian spy, but they didn't.
Well, they would now, but they didn't then.
Yeah.
The other question to do with religion is that I've interviewed quite a lot of masters of colleges, most of whom are agnostic or atheists, and I always ask them how they feel when they're presiding in chapel as masters of the college, and how they square that with their religious disbelief. Was it a problem for you at all?
It wasn't a great problem. I used to go to evensong from time to time, quite often, which I suppose I rationalised on two grounds. One is that I could hear the preacher talk, and he or she wasn't necessarily religious anyway. And the other one was that it gave me a contemplative moment away from the stress and strife of college things. But I thought of it as a collegiate ritual. I mean, actually pronouncing, admitting fellows is a much more explicit form of that. And I took it as a bit of ritual. I usually was very averse to ritual, but I took it as a bit of ritual that was, it came with the rations. It was part of one's obligation, yeah.
Why was it explicitly Christian? Because you do it in the chapel. You use Latin words, but you don't use the words Christ or Jesus. Or
you do in the missions catechism. Yeah, you do at Cats, but you can. There was a way of avoiding using the word Christ, which I did, which I did for Jewish fellows, but not for fellows who I assume Christian. Yeah, but it is more explicit in the. I was going to say catechism, that's probably the wrong word, but in the phraseology at St Catherine's, the admission, yeah.
No, right, well, let's go on to the movement from that school, unless there's anything else you wanted to talk about there, to university.
Yeah.
You went to the LSE?
I went to LSE. By one of the pleasant ironies of life, I got a Lever Hume scholarship. And was interviewed at LSE very nicely. Coincidentally, I happened to be reading The Horse's Mouth by Joyce Carey. It was one of the few novels I was reading. And when they asked me what I was reading, I said that, and that greatly impressed my interviewers, including T.S. Ashton, the historian who was chairing that. And so I went there. I was also interviewed at University College London, but they magnanimously said, well, we see you've been interviewed by LSE. So since I wanted to read economics, they didn't think it was competition. So I went to LSE, in 1949, and was there for 3 years. Very happily. I suppose in retrospect it would have been more interesting to have been at a non-residential, because I lived at home, a non-residential university, and then gone as a graduate student to London. I mean, I did a research student, so I did it the other way around. So there were degrees of inconvenience, but it was very pleasant, and I was quite active in LSE, both academically, where I did quite well, and very much influenced by Jack Fisher.
I was going to say,
yes.
Ask about him.
Very much so, yes. Well, at that age, one is very impressed by the sort of relaxed cynicism of somebody like Jack, and his perception and his the cutting edge of his mind. I mean, this sort of combination is pretty powerful. And I did his special subject, so I was quite close to
16th century economic.
Yes, 16th century, yes, yeah. So that was very, very good. And then also, he didn't temper the wind to the law of Sean Lamb. When I composed a proposal for research to come up to Cambridge, his one comment was, you read a lot of Ernest Hemingway, don't you? Very Jackish. But he was a very strong influence on my
Was he a
life.
good lecturer?
Pardon?
Did you go to his lecture?
Yes, I did.
He was a good lecturer.
He was a good lecturer, a humorous lecturer, and good. I suppose better for good students than for students who wanted to get their head down and get all the data. I mean, in a different way, rather like Lance Beals, who used to lecture and nobody could take notes because we didn't know what he was saying. But Jack Fisher was a very good lecturer. And he was probably a much better small group teacher for the reasons that I've implied. So the seminars, he was really excellent and brought people out, and was really quite good. Ashton, I suppose, was the most straightforward, good lecturer because he had everything well organised. Yeah. So LSE was a very happy time, and I was very active in LSE sports as well. And also I took a role in the student union as a grants officer, writing irate and useless letters to local authorities about student grants.
Well, I talked to Jack Fisher about Tawny, who he knew a bit, and you mentioned you'd met him.
Yes. Oh, well, I met him later. He was retired by the time I got to LSE. Although I went to his lectures, he gave a series of lectures on Lionel Cranfield, which was very close because I've always wanted to see the book of records he was going to produce and never did produce. But when I was a research student, I thought I really ought to see him because I worked on the 1600-1640 period, which is exactly the one he was concerned with Cranfield. And he entertained me to tea in his flat in Mecklenburg Square. But I was disappointed. I mean, he was a lovely man, but he wasn't really very interested in what I was doing or in being forthcoming. But that, I don't know what age he would have been at that time. So this would have been 1953-4, something like that. So
quite old.
He was quite old. Yes, I mean he was very charming and nice, but
disorganised. I mean,
very disorganised. Yeah.
The impression is
and the herbal tobacco rather.
Yes, and sort of fried eggs in among the.
Yes, that's right. His wife was even more disorganised. She came in late to his lectures when he lectured on Cranfield. I was struck also with the fact that the sense that when Tawney lectured in this beautifully modulated prose, I believe he had it committed to memory. I mean, I am sure that because there was one point at which he was interrupted by his wife coming in late and disorganised, and he went back 3 sentences, and they were exactly the same sentences that he had done before. Yeah, but he was he was a sort of hero, as you said of yours. And he's bound to be. I mean, he was a man without very obvious faults, except I think Jack Fisher was rather cynical about Tawney.
Was he?
Yeah, a friend of mine once said, if Jack ever walked by one of the Puritans being burnt at the stake, he would take his pipe out of his mouth and say, "Oh, it's a pity," and walk on.
I mean, Jack was, a hero of mine as well, to a certain extent. Several of his famous articles, but he was one of those pre-RAE style academics who, in his life, produced 4 or 5 really very, very important articles, but I didn't think he produced many magnum
Not at all, no, absolutely not, no. And it was said, no doubt you've heard it, that some of the most influential unwritten books of the 20th century are on Jack Fisher's desk. Oh no, it was he who was producing the Cranfield thing, that was it, yes, and it never came out. And I think his influence lived on through these 3 or 4 seminal articles and through the people he influenced. There were many. I used to see him in later years when I came back to England and was at Sussex in, I suppose now in the 80s, when other devotees entertained him to lunch once every few months, and I used to come up to London and meet him. And he suffered very badly from arthritis, but utterly refused to acknowledge it or alter his behaviour for this terrible pain he was under when he walked. But we had, and he was his usual sparkling self. And he did attract a lot of devotion from some people more than I, because they stayed with him in their graduate years, and I had moved on to Cambridge. And his daughter wrote to me when they heard about the autobiography, and I sent her and my mother copies.
Were there any other, LSE, when I was there for a short time, there were some always very good people in other departments in philosophy, like Ernest Gellner or wherever it was, or David Glass in demography. I went to his lectures, or Keith Hopkins in sociology and so on. Were there other people in other disciplines who inspired you at the LSE? Well, very brief.
The first and strongest, and very briefly, was Karl Popper. I went to Popper's lecture as a first-year student, and was so profoundly impressed that I was tempted to change subject from. I was then an economist. I changed from economic history to philosophy, and went up to him after one of his lectures. It's the only conversation I ever had with him, to try to arrange a meeting so that we could talk about this. And he was very busy. To do him justice, I would have been just as busy perhaps in later years, and didn't brush me off. But it wasn't the response that I was somehow dependently looking for, and that turned me off completely. I shouldn't have done, because the reasons I was thinking of it were much more deeper than that. But they did relate to the way he was lecturing and what he was writing about. So that was an initial influence, and I did go on to read Open Society and so forth. There in economics. There was a lovely Phelps Brown, whom I met in later years when I went to Oxford, who was not so much an influence as a man whose lectures were attractive, and I went to, and also for a quite different reason, the formidable Arnold Plant. You may not have come across Arnold Plant, who was a real reactionary, in the best sense of the word, a very conservative economist who stimulated us a lot. Oh yes, and the other one was Harold Lasky, but everybody says that, but it was Harold Lasky,
He was still around.
Yes, he died in my second year, or the end of my first year. And although I hadn't thought of it like that, when he did die, I felt somewhat bereft, because the feeling I had was somebody who died to whom I could have gone in trouble or for advice or whatever, if I needed to, and he wasn't there. And he was I learned later that he was in fact very good with students and helped graduate students and overseas students who were at LSE. And in many years later, when I met my then wife and got married, she confessed that she'd been at LSE at an earlier stage and had gone to see him for advice about where to go and so forth. So he was an influence, well, not an influence, he was a sort of a model, really. In economic theory, not very much. I did have a little run-in with Lionel Robbins, because I studied what were then called the BSc and the new regulations, now the ancient regulations, which changed life. And he rather progressively organised a meeting with the students to see what they felt, which in 1950 was. And I did have the temerity to say something. I forget what it was, and he slapped me down, and I forget how. But that's not very much.
Yeah.
But I shifted. The man I did become friendly with was Alan Peacock, who was an economist, who was to whom I went to say that I was going to change from economics to economic history, and I, over the years, kept in touch with him.
So you came to Hemingway Land, or I'm not quite sure what the joke about.
It's the style. He thought that the way I'd written it was too much like Hemingway's.
I thought it was some allusion to the old man.
No. It's just that he was looking at the short sentences.
So you came to Cambridge.
I came to Cambridge, yeah.
Why did you come here? There were some economic historians here who.
I can't entirely remember. There was a so-called open scholarship. I had scholarship open to people who were not from Cambridge at Christ's. And I suppose the thought of winning a scholarship and getting some financial base was there, although you could get grants anyway, to get a change. And because Cambridge, yes, was a sort of home of economic history, a home of economic history, and William Poston was here, and Charles Wilson and others. So I put in for the scholarship and research student scholarship, and was awarded it at Christ to my father's ill-concealed delight, and established contact almost immediately with Jack Plum, who was then graduate tutor.
We will have a Plum story or two. Did you? He was quite a lively character, shall we put it?
Oh yes.
You got on though.
I got on with him very well. He was very kind, as he can be. He was a man who had many parts to him, and I fell on the right side of one of the parts, and that was all right. So he cosseted me. I think with Jack Plum, his own origins as a grammar school boy coming into the slightly alien atmosphere of Cambridge made him very sympathetic to people, not only from his own grammar school background. There did people like Neil McKendrick, but to people like me. So he sort of wanted to bring me on. So he did invite me to little tea parties to meet other fellows, and went out his way and encouraged me to see him. And in fact, I can't really give credence to my temerity. There was a time when I got rather unhappy and I felt lonely, and it was different from LSE, and I was away from home. And Cambridge, except for the bell ringing on Wednesdays, didn't seem very much like the sort of sentimental thing that it was held up to be. So I went to see him. I just went to confess this. I can't believe that I would have done, because of the normal course, let's see one of the best. But he was very good. You know, just talked about things. Yeah. So he was there. I mean, he didn't teach me anything, of course, but he gave me supervisees. He organised teaching for me right from the beginning. So I taught at a very early stage, which was a strange experience, because I certainly never lectured, and I hadn't taught. So I got to know quite well in the environs of Christ. My actual supervisor was Charles Wilson of Jesus, who was equally nice, but in a quite different way. He wanted to do nothing but talk about the bursarship of Jesus, which he was then bursting. Yes. So, but Jack Plum, over the years, of course, I was very close to up and down. And then when I came back to Cambridge after many years away, I think he bullied the Fellowship of Christ into electing me, not because they didn't want to, but because he had a spurious theory, which was that anybody who'd been a member of a college was entitled to get a professorial fellowship. They denied this, but it's too late. And so I got to know him quite well as master. Yeah.
And the sort of part of the well-known generation of his pupils were really the next generation on from you, weren't they? I mean, Quentin Skinner and
that's right,
Roy Porter and
and Simon Sharma and Neil McKendrick as well.
They were all about 10 years.
Yes,
later.
They were a bit down the line. Yeah. In fact, there weren't many. There was a man called Maurice Cogan, whom you wouldn't have heard of, who went on to the civil service and did very well in the Department of Education. Chose the wrong department. It was the Department of Education. He did well in the backwater, sort of thing. But, and Jack was very proud of him. But it was the later generation. And people, I met them all on Jack's 80th birthday, because they had a big party, a dinner for him in Christ, and I was one of the speakers. And, typical of Jack, he was very pleased with what I said and rewarded me by offering me the opportunity of giving lunch to Princess Margaret.
That's the highest accolade you could have.
I thought of that at the time, which I did. Yes. But I had a soft and hateful feeling for Jack. I mean, he could be a hateful man, but he was also a lovely man. So.
And the other, his great opponent, of course, was Geoffrey Elton. Did you come across him at all?
I only came across Geoffrey Elton when I came back as to the chair of economic history on the faculty. But he was the same Geoffrey Elton, and I did have. There were a number of occasions, but I had the one occasion when I had to say, Geoffrey, the reason I'm opposing you is I think you're wrong. He's very adamant about things, but he was without. I think, like some others, he was without conscience when it came to supporting his own students. And when one of his graduate students was the performance as a PhD was questioned, he wanted to change the whole rules for this and things like that. But he was getting on by then. We're talking then about 82, 3, something like that. But he I met, and I also met Eric Hosborne here. Yeah, when I was a graduate student. And in fact, Eric Hosborne asked me where I'd come from, and I said the school, rather pompously, and he quite rightly said, "Which school was that?" Meaning the London School of Economics.
I see. Yes. I've interviewed him. He hasn't, and he went through the grammar school system that you were describing. And, was he teaching in Cambridge when you met him, or was he just a?
I think he was the Ehrman Fellow here, which was this sort of 5-year fellowship that Jack once urged me to, which I didn't get, but I'll tell you about that later. And Jack said, "You must go in for it because a fellow of kings has never starved." But I think Eric was then the Ehrman Fellow. And was having constant tussles with Peter Laslett. I once went to a little debate they had together.
What was your PhD on?
Well, it was very much a derivative from Jack Fisher. It was on commercial crisis and change. It was called 1600, 1640, on trade fluctuations. Yeah, it was the book. Yeah, it was the book. And I chose it. Initially, I'd chosen the whole 100 years, middle of the 16th, the middle of the 17th century. But it was soon obvious that it was much too big a bite, so I halved it. So it was a sort of continuation of the interest that Jack had had, and no doubt he was capable of writing it at the drop of a hat, but he didn't, because he hadn't written these things. You know, he followed on from. He'd written something on fluctuations of the wool trade in the late 16th century, and so so it was with his advice, I suppose, and that was the thesis. For which I had to spend a fair amount of time in London in the public record office as it then was, which was the point at which I said to myself, well, have I done it the right way around? Would I have had a better time athletically and intellectually as an undergraduate at Cambridge? And then but it didn't make much difference. So I took, I think, certainly one, perhaps 2 terms in London, but a lot of time here because the calendar of state papers was quite good for me, things like that. And Charles Wilson gave me a lot of free rein because he didn't know much about it.
Was he interested at all? Or was he...
Oh yes, he was quite interested and encouraging, and used to read things, and I would go to see him, and he came to the seminar paper I gave in it to Munya Poston's seminar, and he appropriated some of it to publish himself at some later stage. That's the name of the game. And he was very good. He was very good in particular. Charles was very good in particular when at some stage I stumbled across in the Public Record Office some papers relating to Thomas Munn. I don't know if you've come across Thomas Munn, the 17th century economist, who really discovered the balance of payments. But nobody quite knew, and he published a book on it, a pamphlet on it in the late. It was published posthumously, and it was called England's Treasure by Foreign Trade. And I discovered the submission he made to a commission of inquiry in 1621, which had it all there. And just as I was about to publish it, some other so-and-so found it and published it. And I went in some distress to Wilson, but Wilson was very good. He said, things would. It's all right. Other things will happen, and this isn't the end of the world. You'll publish something. You can do this as well, and I did publish it as well. And he was very, very philosophic, in the same way that Jack Plum was in later years, when I failed to be elected to the mastership of Christ, and he said, "Doors open, Barry. Doors open. Don't worry." And that's what I called my autobiography.
Yes, I remember that. Yes. The other figure, we've only got 2 or 3 minutes, but if you're talking about Tawney and the run up to the Civil War, the other figure of that time that springs to many people's minds is Hugh Trevor Roper.
Yes.
Did you come across Hugh?
I didn't when I was a graduate student. I did in later years twice. Once when he came to Sussex in its early days to give lectures on Christian Europe, or I forget what it was called. And there was a great tizzy about that. And then when I was master of St Catherine's, and he became master of Peterhouse. But I only knew him in that sense socially, not academically. Lawrence Stone I knew a bit, again in later years, because I edited, I forget what it was I edited for for one of the journals of his. But I wasn't close to them. Really.
Harvard Business School.
Yeah, well, in that case, Charles Wilson was the intermediary. Charles had written and published the first serious company history on an academic basis series in England, which was of Unilever.
Yeah.
And this had established him very powerfully as a leading figure in British business history, and drawn him to the attention of the Harvard Business School, who were looking for a successor to N.S.B. Grass, who was a pioneer of business history there. He declined, and when they asked him if he could name somebody else, possibly a young scholar, he named me. And I was then approached, flew to Cologne, I think, for an interview with the Harvard dean of the school, and was invited to go to Harvard Business School initially as a visiting lecturer, as a sort of trial basis. and that was in 1955. And so, callowly, at the age of 24, I went to the Harvard Business School, where the average age of the students was about 28 or 30. And it's the first time I'd been to America, almost the first time, other than to France, that I'd been out of the country, out of this country. And that was in September 55. Yeah. Having been examined for my PhD by Jack Fisher and William Poston. And if I can tell one anecdote about that, Jack Fisher said to me partway through the oral, I noticed that you haven't mentioned the Council of the North as one of the sources of your information. Why is that? And I said, well, I had enough material from the public record. I fudged it, Privy Council. Oh, he said, taking his pipe out of his mouth, it wasn't because all the records were burnt in the 19th century. Which is a very Jack Fisherish thing. Anyway, they nevertheless gave me the PhD.
What about, we didn't talk about Poston, was it?
Well, Poston was a sort of influence. I saw him from time to time. I didn't, like a lot of research students, I had an individual life, a soul life. I used to go to a seminar regularly. And we knew each other. And when I submitted an article for publication, he was either then or later. He said to me, yes, well, it's good, but you ought to study somebody else's style. I won't name the other person, a person whose style I didn't much admire. He said, but no, Poston was quite helpful. It was only in later years when I came back as one of his successors that we got to know each other, really.
He was a formidable man, wasn't he?
He was a formidable man. I didn't go to many lectures when I was a research student, but I did go to a couple of his, and yes, he was an extraordinary man. Do you want to hear about that?
Yes, I do.
Because he did combine a sort of flamboyant neglect of some things, even academic things, with profound perceptive insights into things. I mean, he's a man of great ideas, a bit like Jack Fisher in a funny way. He'd cut to the problem and do it. On the other hand, the anecdote which I always savour because it's so much of Poston, he's giving a lecture in America and saying there was no shortage of capital in Tsarist Russia, and the evidence for that is that the rate of interest was only 4%. There was no shortage of capital. At which point David Landers, who subsequently went on to great fame but was then a young scholar, said, Professor Poston, that seems perfect. That seems very low. And Poston says, what? 7, 8, 9% is low? So he made up things less often than he found them out, but he was a very good and interesting scholar. Yeah. And he cared about things.
Yes, he was passionate, and this combination of being a very good medievalist and a very good modernist.
Yes,
it's quite unusual.
It's unique, I think. Well,
Trevor Roper to a certain extent.
Yes, that's true. But in economic history, it's very rare indeed, and but it was a remarkable one because he established powerful reputations. I mean, in the real world, I should say, as well as academic world in this, because he was very friendly with Hugh Gaitskell and gave advice.
I may have got it wrong. Did he marry Eileen Power? Or
he did, yes, he did. He was widowed. Yes, that was a most extraordinary pairing, as his subsequent marriage was as well. Yes, he did marry Eileen.
Did you know her at all?
No, I never met her. No.
She was an interesting lady. Okay, well, you stayed in America for how long?
I was in America for 5 years. Initially, after a bit, after the excitement, unhappily, feeling I ought to come back, because I was lonely and I missed Cambridge and I missed this and the other. And by the time, and declined an opportunity which I kick myself for even now, of getting I had a temporary visa, work permit but a temporary visa, and declined the opportunity. It was called an exchange visitors visa. Declined the opportunity of getting an immigrant visa because I was going on holiday and I knew I didn't want to stay. At least I thought I didn't want to stay. And by the time I'd come round, it was too late because the law had changed, and if you were on exchange visitor visa, you had to leave the country for 2 years before you could go back. The Americans introduced it in order to protect the schemes that had brought over people from less developed countries to on exchange visitors visas to study, and then stayed on and didn't go back with all their new skills to wherever it was. I had married by that time and had a child or two who were American, and my
You
wife
sound
was
rather
English.
vague about how many children you had.
Well, I forget the exact timing
I
at
see.
which I I know exactly how many children I had, but by the time I had to shape up to
I
this.
see, yes.
And I was there for 5 years, and at some point I had to leave because the law had changed, much as I wanted to stay. So I did the next best thing and went to Canada for 2 years, to McGill. I mean, I took a job and it was in Canada, and it happened that it lasted 2 years, thinking that those 2 years would enable me to come back. And at that stage, at the end of the 2 years, when I was qualified to get an American visa, I discovered, which I think is the truth, which is that you can decide all you want about countries, but in the end it's also the institution that attracts you. And there was nothing on the horizon in American academia that attracted me, except the possibility of a job at MIT, which I would have taken had they been more impressed by me than they were, to replace Walt Rostow, who then moved off to the Kennedy administration. Whereas Sussex had just started, so Sussex as against Oshkosh or whatever in the States seemed a much more... And Asa Briggs, whom I knew very well by that time, was very persuasive about this. This was in the early first year of Sussex. So we came back to England. So I was 5 years in the States, 2 years in Canada at McGill. And I suppose I could have easily stayed, and it was in a way very attractive. But I found Canada, for me, an unsatisfactory compromise between America and Britain, so to say. More parochial and less exciting than I wanted it to be. Although it was very good, I wouldn't want to criticise it.
So you went back to Sussex. That perhaps explains something. I noticed you're an honorary fellow of my old college at Oxford, Worcester. And I was wondering why you were, because you weren't at Worcester, presumably, at Oxford. But was it through Asa Briggs?
No, it was through St Catherine's, because we're sister colleges, although it doesn't mean very much now.
I see.
But there used to be exchanges at annual dinners.
Amicabilis Concordia, or whatever it's called.
So I became
I see.
for that, yeah.
So you went back to Sussex, and it was quite new, wasn't it, at that?
Yes, they'd always intended the university to start in October 62, which is when I went there. But in the event, it was because of pressure of students wanting to go to university and expansion. It was actually opened on a shoestring in 61, but not on the site which it now occupies, but in a house in Brighton, and Asa Briggs and I think 7 other academics, not me. And then in 62, it opened on the main site in Portakabins and with one building, and that's when I went back. Yeah, that was very exciting.
Yeah, tell me about being as an opening of a new university of that period. It was an exciting...
It was very exciting because one was actually creating things. I remember years later Asa saying that one of his regrets was he didn't keep a diary because it's such a rare event in history to be at present university. It was very exciting because one was both constructing a curriculum, recruiting people, and organising a structure, a governance structure. And although I wasn't all that senior, I was moderately senior, and I became secretary of the School of Social Sciences, where Asa was dean as well as pro-vice chancellor. So I was pretty much near the levers of influence and power anyway. And that was very dramatic, devising not only new courses, but courses that were new, that hadn't been taught before, like Contemporary Britain or Modern European Mind or whatever. And I, in fact, ended up, I stayed there for 16 years, in one way or another. Every time I thought of leaving, something else, which I'll talk about in a minute, something else intervened. So I went there in 62, although I have to say that in the August of 62, just before I started, the University of Michigan invited me to go and talk with them about possibilities, and I went, and I was very impressed. But at that stage, I was very much missing. I had always regretted not staying in America, but I was then missing it, and sort of accepted the post and came back, and then realised that my wife and certainly two, now rising 3 children, the third one was born in September, back in the arms of my wife's family, and I back in the arms of mine, deeply embedded, that it would have seemed both feckless and worrying to jump back, even before I started at Sussex, because the term hadn't started yet for which I'd come back. So I changed my mind, not for the first or the last time, as you'll see when you come to read the autobiography, and didn't go to Michigan. Stayed at Sussex very happily, but exactly the same sort of thing happened in '64 when I was invited back to Harvard to be a visiting professor and give some lectures while Gershon came to England. I introduced him to Jack Fisher, and I understand the two sort of warily circled each other like beasts of the jungle, but I told him to get in touch with us. And that was very exciting, and I was strongly tempted to stay there. But Asa Briggs, who was no fool, trumped it by getting me a promotion even before I'd come back. I think to reader at that stage, you know. And again, I had got... Oh, no, that's a more interesting story. In '64, I'd got a contingent immigrant visa to the States, even though I was only going for 3 months. And my wife had got one, 2 of the children were already American citizens, because by birth, the third one, we put on one of the other children's passports. And I was offered a job at Berkeley, and was very impressed with what I saw. I went there, and was hosted there by a man called Henry Rozovsky. You may probably haven't come across him. It's Rozovsky,
yes,
modern historian, subsequently became dean at Harvard, and was on the point of accepting, because it was tropical paradise. And then Henry phoned me one day and said, "I can't advise you to come here anymore. I'm leaving. David Landis, who was there, is leaving. There's turmoil," because it was the beginning of the student rebellion, the free speech movement.
66-ish.
64.
64.
Yeah, before it became violent, but it was very unrest was rampant. It was Savio. I forget the man's first name. He was the first student leader, and there was a free speech movement. They wanted to meet in some way, and Henry said, which was very indicative. He said, "It's getting like the University of Saigon." And that put me off, obviously. And so I didn't and couldn't, and didn't want to go to Brandeis, which was another alternative. So slightly with my tail between my legs, came back to England. Like Henry, who was going to Harvard for a quiet life, thinking I would have a quiet life, and Henry at Harvard and I somewhat later at Sussex did not have a quiet life in terms of the student unrest. So that was another occasion when I came back to England.
What was it about America that attracted you so much? I mean, either at the academic level or the cultural level.
Well, I've often asked myself that in empirical detail. Not the most important thing, but to get it off the thing, I am a bit of a materialist, and I enjoy the material side of American life. I enjoy the things that go with it, the sort of openness of the possibilities, not only of acquiring things, but using things, interlocking. I think I appreciated American university openness, the social, the relaxed nature, American humour, the potential for possibilities in that sort of society, which, I mean, no doubt I'm wrong, but I mean that's what I felt, that things were, you could break out of things, that the world was your oyster, that things were possible. And I found it and still do find it very relaxing and uninhibited, really. So that I've always felt myself as a sort of pseudo-American. And over the years, I used to think here that, well, I'm here, it's lovely, and I'm enjoying it, and when I retire, I'll get a retirement job in America or something like this. But of course, the more time passed, the more, both by institutional commitment and by personal life, one was embedded in English society, which is good. And so it sort of faded away. And even when my first wife died, alas, and I got remarried and married an American, and there was a choice then. I was retired by then from here, although I was doing post-retirement work for a foundation. There was a question as to where we might live. And again, I resisted that, partly now because my grown-up children and their children were all in England. It seemed a slightly, again, feckless thing to do. So I didn't. What I should have done was to buy a flat there and kept a flat here, instead of which I put down roots here with my new wife. So those are some of the things that attracted me, and I've always been interested both in American politics, American literature, learning about it. I mean, the New York Times figures more prominently than the London Times in my email connections here. And I've been back very frequently, really. I've just come back from a long trip. And if I had my time over again, I would stay. I would have stayed. I mean, I would
stayed in America.
Yeah, I would have gone to America without doubt. But of course, incidentally, once my children had grown up, it was too late really to become an American, because they were English. I mean, it meant leaving them, or culturally leaving them. Whereas had we stayed in America, I'm sure there would have been periods in which I would have deeply regretted staying. They would have taken to drugs or the turmoil of American society. I mean, one of the attractions of America, Alan, is that there are times where you despair of the society, its politics. Awful, things happen, and particularly the Vietnam War and what happened in universities. But it comes through, it survives, and then it somehow reinvents itself, and it's something like it used to be. And I remember thinking that in 1976, when they were celebrating the centenary, bicentenary, that they'd come through the turmoil of the Vietnam War. I mean, Vietnam War still existed, and they've done worse things since. But it's a society of perpetual possibility, I suppose.
Is it perpetually a society of perpetual possibility?
It's perpetually, yes. It
Do you
never
think,
attains.
because Tocqueville, of course, praised it for being a young country which could recover from its failures, and that's what we all continue to hope it will do. But
Absolutely.
Countries grow old, and they come to a point where it's less easy to recover from your...
You do, yes, they do. I despair of what's going on at the moment, but I do remember despairing earlier. So it's interesting you mentioned de Tocqueville, because I recall that in the spring of 1960, when I knew I had to leave America, and Canada had appeared on the horizon, and McGill as a possibility. Before flying to McGill for my interview, I read de Tocqueville. For some reason I had it, and realised what I was sort of leaving as well. But I knew I had to leave at that stage. And I still have a mental image, a great memory of driving with my U-Haul trailer behind me, and the young family with us, up to Montreal, and hearing the Battle Hymn of the Republic being sung by the Mormon choir on the car radio, and thinking, I mean, these are all movie images, but they're whatever Evelyn Waugh said about popular music is very true. That it's a very powerful instrument, and this is more than popular music. Anyway, that's
interesting. Returning to Sussex just very briefly.
Yes.
You mentioned you were quite involved as secretary of the school and so on. And you'd earlier mentioned your interest in bureaucracy and your esteem of bureaucracy. So this fitted quite well with your interest in shaping an institution.
Oh yes, because I went on to succeed Asa first as the dean of the school, and then as what was then called chairman of the arts deans, but the arts deans were transmuted when there was devolution of the university, and I became pro vice chancellor for that half of the university, which was arts and social studies. So I was very much embedded in the bureaucracy of Sussex. Yes.
I mean, you seem to enjoy it. I mean, many academics Ernest Gellner's theory was that academics, when they no longer had anything useful to say to the world, became administrators.
Yeah.
But certainly a lot of people I've met have been both extremely good academics and good administrators. And some clearly just don't love, but they find it quite interesting.
Yes. I found it interesting. I felt it was possible to combine. I mean, I could have done much more academic work had I not been an administrator, but I found it possible to combine some. I remember a long conversation I actually had with Noel Annan, who came down to talk about what it was like and what hierarchies are like in universities. I think when he'd just gone to University College, London. I think it is true that there are some academics who retreat into administration because they're either burned out or had nothing to burn out to begin with. But there are others, who affect to despise administration, but who don't necessarily achieve very much anyway. But the image I always had of people who say, "I don't understand all this paper," which if you're already a professor, you should understand all this paper, even if you don't do the work. But there's an affectation on both sides, I think. But certainly. Like a lot of, one of the articles I never write is why economic historians have become such utility players in the world of academic administration. If you tick them off on your fingers, there are a lot of them. And Peter Mathias here and Beric Saul, who was from Liverpool, I think, lots of Martin Daunton. It's a very common thing. I think it's partly it's smoke and mirrors. The humanities people think they're social scientists, and social scientists think they're humanities. Everybody thinks they understand more than they do. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted that.
And you obviously organise your time rather efficiently to fit in. Can you tell me about your day when you were in the middle of this, either then or later, slightly later? How do you organise your time?
Yes. Well, I suppose I'm a list man who draws up the list in order to get things out of his head rather than in order to do things in an orderly way. I do that. I tend to react to issues or problems that arise, let's say administratively, shooting from the hip. The thing itself. I'm not a good time organiser. I suppose I'm a fairly hard worker in that I would stay up late to do the things. But thinking back, I'm not sure I have had a great system. I think I neglected academic potential. I could have written more. My output hasn't been huge anyway. And I've been fortunate in the 2 or 3 things I've done have had some prominence, but I think they could have been much more much more profound if I'd wanted them to. But I allowed myself to do these other things as well. On the other hand, I didn't lose a lot of sleep over administrative issues, and I always did have the feeling that a lot of the issues that were brought to me, certainly when I was at college, by fellows at the college, were issues that just wanted to talk about. They weren't issues that involved administrative effort later on. People have problems that are not insoluble. But what they need is to talk about them, and that I was happy to do. And I think I was probably quite a good chairman, so that I didn't waste a lot of time with the meetings, both the college meetings and the college's committee of heads of houses. I don't quite know. I do take administration seriously. I was about to say I don't take it seriously. I don't let it occupy my entire life.
It doesn't seep out of the administrative framework into your dreams and holidays.
No, not really. No. In fact, when I was on holiday, the conceit I allowed myself was always is to write a postcard to the Vice Chancellor saying, whoever he or she was, we're thinking of you. It's all right. You're thought of even by people on holiday. So I managed to combine them, but I think in a disproportionate way. I wouldn't like to claim that I was both a well-established scholar and a successful administrator.
Taking the other side, the academic work, how do you work there? I'm always interested. Do you work in the mornings? Do you work in the evenings? Do you have your great thoughts in the bath or on walks?
Yes.
Do you listen to music? What?
I sit at a desk. I don't listen to music. I can't work while listening. I can't work while listening to music. I can sort papers. Can't work that. And I don't, on the whole, do academic work in the evening. I didn't. I was silly using the present tense. I didn't do academic work in the evenings. But yeah, day by day and weekends. I mean, I think that on the whole, in one sense, I might have been verged on being a neglectful father or family man, in that I would work through the weekends and things. So I would tackle things but I think by writing, I think, is the answer which you're getting at. I mean, I have my thoughts by trying to write them down and seeing them evolve and seeing parallels as I write, and wanting always to start writing before I'm ready, in a way. And well, now, I mean, when I was a grad research student, I did all the inductive work first. I mean, Geoffrey Otten would have been proud of me. But I don't think I have a particular style didn't have a particular style of doing these things. And I'm sad that over the last 17 years I haven't really been very productive since I left Cambridge.
Were there situations which led you to have, as they are rather cliched, eureka moments? In other words, do you remember occasions when something happened, you went to listen to or watch a film or something, and then you suddenly thought, that's the cause of the Civil War? Or
Yes. Not many. There was one which was more a parallelism, although I always think it's an interesting parallelism. In the late 60s, when Asa became Vice-Chancellor of Sussex and I became Pro-Vice-Chancellor, we pioneered the use of a management consultancy firm to come and investigate us. It was McKinsey's. I remember Jack Fisher saying to me said, what will happen is they will come and they will say, essentially they will say to you, are you centralised or decentralised? And whatever you say, they'll tell you to do the opposite, which is exactly what happened. They came and said, you're too centralised, be decentralised. That's how I became Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Arts. Now, that established a structure of decentralised sub-institutions within the bigger institution. And at that time, I was writing the history of the Royal Exchange Assurance and the insurance industry. And I think I saw this there. I mean, obviously you make up these things, they're devices. So I wrote a history which had a lot in it about delegation and decentralisation and subordinate institutions, much as the parallel university was doing. I suppose that's the nearest I've got to a sort of seeing an idea from the outside rather than building up something from the inside. The other thing, which wasn't a eureka moment, but was I was writing the history of the coal industry at the time of the Great Coal Strike in 84-5. So there were echo effects, because I was doing work on the 20th century coal industry. So there were echo effects that I was able to bring over and go back. And I remember the then warden of Nuffield saying, what do you think of it? And I said, well, the point at which the bishops intervene is the point at which the strike will end.
Will end?
Will end, yeah, well, it brings it down.
Bring on the bishops.
Bring on the bishops, yeah. Anyway, but other than that, no great eureka moments. No.
What about methods? I mean, as you say, a lot of your work is quite based on facts, as they used to call them, inductive and so on. Do you have conned indexing systems and filing systems, or computer filing systems?
I don't know. I did. When I was a graduate student, I was a pioneer of methodology. I had CopeChat files, CopeChat cards.
I used to have those too.
Yes. Well, since I'm older than you, I had
little holes.
That's right, and you clip the top. And that's how I had all my notes, and it was brilliant because I put the knitting needle through and lifted them up, and was able to write from that, which I did. But I've lost the code.
I thought you were going to say you lost the needle.
No, the needles I can find. I lost the codes. I have all these somewhere in the attic, but they're useless because I don't know which holes to push the bloody needle through. Anyway, that was the system I had then. Subsequently, lots and lots of notes on A4. The thing that I found was a a disadvantage as well as a blessing was the use of research assistants. When I wrote the Royal Exchange, I had a research assistant the whole time, and he produced much too much for me to absorb. You spend all your time reading what they write and talking about it and doing very little thinking yourself. So, unlike Les, do you know Les Hammer? Who used to just get people to write in position papers and then. But I mean, it was useful when you're doing a very big history, but it could be disadvantageous. And the other thing is to have too many resources. When I wrote the coal industry, I had unlimited typing aid at the National Coal Board. So I used to take a tape recorder into the public record office and dictate it in. They would type it up, and all I did was transfer this huge pile of material from the public record office to my desk. I hadn't done anything with it. There was no absorption.
No, that's one of the problems. Perhaps just to finish on that, well, not to finish, but can pursue that just a little. If someone said, academically, intellectually, what of your academic work do you think you would like to select for your desert island, or for other people on their desert islands? What do you think are your most interesting, important, influential ideas? One or two of them and explain what they are to the world out there which is waiting.
Yes, Alan, do you mean the particular empirical things or the approach, the nature of the ideas?
Whichever you like.
Yes. Well, I suppose the original work on the early 17th century, in the sense of seeing a relationship between economic thinking, economic thought, and empirical events. And therefore a sensitivity to the symbiosis between the way people think about problems and the problems that arise. I mean, this balance of payments thing was an example of that. And also the incidence of the fluctuations in Britain's cloth trade and the reactions of the government, the reactions of early economists to it. That's one approach. And I did a fair amount of that in a quite different way later on, when I got interested in 20th century economic policy and the concept of decline and the interaction between how governments responded and thinkers like Keynes responded to events, to the course of development or lack of it in the 20s and 30s, and the actual events themselves. So I did write a fair amount on that, on economic thinking and policy. It's really on political economy, I suppose, and that is a title I use for the coal industry as well. And in that sense, although I don't think that people use it as much as I had hoped, the coal industry book did say some useful things, but I think it's the insurance industry one that I suppose made the most original contribution to a field that had been sidelined or neglected or whatever. I mean, had not been written about much, and taking that industry seriously as a sort of emblem of middle class development in England. And asking the question, you're asking questions, reminds me of things I've done that I've forgotten about, because it got me interested in the concept of thrift and government regulation of thrift, which I wrote a big article on in the 19th century. Building societies and savings banks and things like that. And again, it had a sort of the nature of the problem, housing, savings on the one hand, and how you think about them and legislate for them on the other, and the social implications. So it's that sort of thing, I suppose.
You're right. I was wondering to what extent the climate of the time influenced this, because it seems to be the time when there's all this discussion about the decline of the British economy.
Oh, certainly the decline. That was a very strong influence, because in fact I got interested in the topic of decline, on which I had my presidential address to the Economic History Society, and then it was my Festschrift was about that. I got interested in it precisely because I was reviewing whinging books about decline and seeing what was being said in the papers and everything, and I really took a sort of counterintuitive view, I suppose, and perhaps obstinately wanted to find reasons why this was an exaggerated or a misplaced view. So I wrote a fair amount about what is decline and why do we call it decline. if somebody from the 18th century had come and visited England, he'd say, decline? What decline? That sort of thing.
Yes. The obverse of decline is rise. I mean, have you been at all interested in the rise of, well, particularly Asian societies? I spent time in China.
Not recently. When I was in America, which was when this thing was just started, I did, because I used to go to a seminar which met regularly, I was interested in economic development and theories of
Because
development.
you were with Gershon,
That's right, yeah. So that concept of 19th century growth and what explained it and why backward countries had an advantage and things of that sort, which I've written a little bit on. That was strong. But more recently, not the Asian giants, no, except to lose money in the stock market. Well, my college benefited greatly from it in the 70s before I got there, because they
and then you lost it all.
Then lost it all back. Kenneth Beryl came here.
Yes. Okay, well, let's move on to. There's so many other things in your career. After Sussex, you went to Oxford, did you, or?
Yes, I was eager to leave Sussex. I'd been there a long time, which was the reason enough, 16 years. It had been unhappy in some years because of the student unrest and because of what I took to be Asa Briggs' toleration of a lot of it. But to do him justice, I probably would have behaved the same way if I was there with the levers of power. But anyway, so I wanted to go, and then I had an extraordinary incident here, which I have written about, but I don't know whether you want to hear it.
Yes.
Because I applied for the chair of economic history when Donald Coleman left.
Oh, yes.
In whenever that was, 71.
When David Jocelyn?
When David Jocelyn died, when David Jocelyn died, that's right. No, it was the other way. David Jocelyn died and Coleman came, didn't he?
Yes, something like
and then
that.
Coleman retired, and I thought I'd apply for it, thinking how much my father would appreciate this. He was still alive then, and I got cold feet the day before, 2 days before the election. Cold feet, not because I didn't think I was up to it, but because my family was well embedded. We'd been instrumental in transforming the education system in Sussex into a comprehensive system which we much favoured. I came up to Cambridge to scout out things, and all the middle class academics I talked with did nothing but talk about grammar schools and their anxieties and things like that. Housing was expensive. My wife was it suddenly seemed a very selfish thing to do. So I drafted a letter withdrawing from the competition, and was still undecided. I drafted in order to see what I felt like, and went down to Brighton Station with a man called Larry Lerner, who's an English literature, to meet somebody. He said, "Oh, you've got a letter in your hand, I'll post it for you." And before I knew what I was doing, it was in the postbox. And that the morning, 2 days later, which is the day of the election, I got a telephone call from the Vice Chancellor saying, "You've withdrawn. Are you sure you want to?" And self-respect and esteem and desire not to be humiliated led me to say, "No, I'm afraid I do have to insist." So that wasn't to be. That was 71. And from that day until 78, hardly a day passed without my saying. Anyway, and then in 78, the readership in recent social and economic history at Oxford came vacant, and without hesitation I applied for it.
So you were at Sussex for 7 years, feeling you'd rather have been somewhere else? Really.
Yeah, intermittently. I'd say not a day, but intermittently, yeah. I mean, there were moments of great happiness, and I learned to play tennis, and all this sort of thing. But yeah, I felt that it was not the place I had wanted to be, ideally. And then Oxford. And Asa Briggs left. He went to Worcester.
Yes.
I became the Pro-Vice Chancellor, which was sort of tedious. And then Oxford came along, but alas, my father had died by then, so it was too late. Yeah.
And how was Oxford?
Oxford is very good. Nuffield is a brilliant place to be. No undergraduates. Quite wealthy, small place, like a social science research. Well, a social science research institute. Very helpful, nice colleague, good colleagues. We lived in a very nice house in North Oxford. the library.
Which road were you in?
Summertown. We were in Middle Way.
Middle Way.
Between the Banbury Road and whatever the other one's called.
Yes.
And it was Summertown. It was the place. It was a villa that had been built in the 1860s to house the.
I went to school there. I lived there.
That's right. So that was all very nice, and I could have happily spent the rest of my career there. And then the Cambridge chair fell due again. Sorry, I've got it all wrong. You're right. It was Jocelyn. Coleman got it, and then retired early. And that was when, in '78, I said, I started to crack my knuckles again. Do I really want to go there? And not do I knew I wanted to go there, but why should I have another upheaval? And in the end, I talked with people. Chelly Halsey, who was very helpful.
He was at Nuffield, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was at Nuffield. Yeah, and Robin Matthew. I came and stayed with Robin at Clare, and in the end, thought really. I said this to be interesting for your listeners as well as being in the book, because I said I had a thought experiment. I said to myself, supposing you're on your deathbed and somebody comes to you and said, you mean you had the opportunity of going to the chair at Cambridge and you refused to take it? I knew. No competition. So I applied and I got it.
You were a reader at Oxford, were you, at that time? Or?
Yes, yes. But I was a professorial fellow of Nuffield. I mean, it was no difference. I got the Nuffield treats its fellows very generously. They gave me give everybody an allowance, which brought them up to professorial level of salary. The position was the same.
So what's big about coming to Cambridge then?
Well, a number of reasons. One is I had a feeling that the university at which you were a student, in my case either LSE or Cambridge, is a sort of echt university. Everything else is a slightly inferior substitute. So that was one thing, simply the draw of being it. Secondly, the feeling that it was a better place for economic history, not better, it was a more interesting place for economic history because of its own tradition and the people who'd been here. And thirdly, I think I wanted to be a little bit more in a traditional setting. And Nuffield was a lovely place, and it isn't a traditional college, and I felt I ought to savour that. And finally, there was the deathbed argument. It's better to have been the professor of economic history in Cambridge than the reader in recent social economic history at Oxford, in esteem, I suppose. It just seemed a more appropriate thing, and I suppose I was thinking of my father, really. What he would have said, because he was so pleased when I came here as a graduate student.
Well, he wouldn't have had much preference of Cambridge over Oxford, presumably, but it was just the professor.
I thought about that. It's certainly the professor. I think he might have thought of Cambridge somehow, but I don't know why. Perhaps because I'd been there originally. I mean, I remember him saying when I came how proud he was that Jack Plum had asked me to do some teaching. I said, I suppose that's the way in which you encourage academics. Yeah.
When you came, this is late 70s, early 80s?
It was 81.
81.
Yeah. I was only 2 or 3 years in Oxford.
I mean, it's not the peak period, but it's a highish point in the Cambridge group for the study of population social structure. And Tony Wrigley, of course, overlaps with your interest a good deal, and Peter Lassett and so on. Did you have much dealing with Peter?
A little bit, not very much, because as we say in the classics, it isn't my period. I had come across Peter a bit. I became quite friendly with him. My wife and I both did. But before that, I'd been chairman of the Economic and Social History Committee of the then SSRC. And we came up on a visitation once, and I remember asking him a rather inappropriate question about how much teaching they actually do or something, and he stormed out of the room because he thought it wasn't the teaching, it was the feeling that I was pressing them on irrelevant issues to the main function of the group, which was to find out new things, which they did. So I knew Tony, of course, and Richard Smith and 1 or 2 others, but I didn't have much to do with the group.
Intellectually?
Intellectually, no. It wasn't my bag or whatever. I mean, it wasn't something I was working on, because I'd long since ceased to be an early modernist anyway. Although that isn't all that they do.
Tony's a sort of industrial revolution.
He is industrial revolution, yes. But by that time I was working on the 20th century coal industry, so I was very much
he's a coal industry man.
That's true. In another time, so I was having an interest in modern and in American history, American history. Yeah. So yeah, they were exciting. I remember feeling the differences between the two institutions. That when I went to Oxford and asked the then secretary of the faculty what he thought I should lecture on, what he would like me to lecture on, to which the answer was, "Oh, my dear chap, it's entirely up to you, please." Well, because I did divine that at Oxford you don't tell people what to do, because then they don't tell you what to do. But when I got to Cambridge, it was, there was a slot for me, which is fine. There was a curriculum, and that had to be covered, and that was everything. It was much more meaningful. And of course, the faculty is much stronger here. The faculty has an organisation than it is at Oxford, where people only went to faculty meetings in order to vote down change, if there's any development in the curriculum.
Otherwise, sort of in terms of tone or culture, how would you characterise the colleges are smaller, as you said?
In Oxford, yes. Well, they are, but of course I was at a very distinctive college anyway, Nuffield. I mean, it wasn't an orthodox college, but they're bigger here, they're more relaxed. The other thing for me, as it would be for anybody coming from Nuffield, was the variety, the academic variety of the fellowship. I met scientists and with them, and it was also a bit like coming home back to Christ, where I'd been as a graduate student, to be there. So the collegiate life I found rather attractive, and they gave me a nice room where I was able to work adequately, which didn't happen to everybody. It was a bit of patronage by Jack Plum. I mean, not every professor got a room. I turned a blind eye to this distinction, and that was nice. And I met very congenial colleagues like David Cannadine and Quentin again. I mean, I'd known Quentin before. Quentin was instrumental in persuading me to put in for the chair. So that was very good, and so there was a much warmer, more sympathetic, more intellectually redolent atmosphere in Christ's than there had been in Nuffield, although Nuffield was, for another reason, quite interesting. And also I was able to feel because I was a professor, but in any case because of the organisation in Cambridge, able to feel myself much more part of the university structure of my field than it was at Oxford, where, as I said, the faculty hardly existed. But here faculty meetings are important, and also I was a member of the economics faculty because of the chair is ex officio member, so that was interesting or a bit fraught because it was still in the tail end of this sort of Trotskyite Marxist thing. But met all sorts of interesting people and got to know Robin Matthews better as well. We collaborated on an article on Marshall in the centenary.
You mentioned that one advantage of Nuffield was there were no undergraduates. Do you actually enjoy teaching, lecturing, or supervising?
I enjoyed supervising. I didn't much enjoy lecturing because I don't think I'm a very good lecturer. And therefore the audiences weren't as numerous or ebullient as I wanted. I do frankly remember being here and hopefully waiting the extra few minutes in case an extra 3 or 4 people would come in. I mean, people attended, but it wasn't like Quentin Skinner or Geoffrey Elton. So I sort of enjoyed the intellectual challenge of compiling a lecture, and in a sense giving it, but I preferred the supervision and the personal contact and the ability to get one's teeth into an essay and talk about it. But I didn't do much of that here, because in fact I didn't teach a lot. I mean, I gave my lectures and did some supervision of graduate theses, but I didn't do any undergraduate theses. I didn't do any undergraduate normal supervision here, whereas I did in Oxford.
Did you do any? Have you done much PhD supervising?
Not as much as I had wanted. I think partly because of my distinctive, what I was doing. But I have done, some, and some of the, oddly enough, some of the thesis examining has been with more interesting people than those I was supervising. A man called Paul Johnson, who worked on savings banks and thrift and everything. He's now in Australia, but he was at LSE as an example of that. And David Feldman, who went to Birkbeck, whose thesis I examined, and things like that. Yeah. So I didn't have as much contact with continuously with research students as I would have liked.
Well, we've got about 10 minutes, so we've got two major things that are on my agenda. One is mastership of some cats, and then the Leverhulme, and there'll probably be one or two other things. But let's move perhaps to some Catherines.
Yeah.
Why did you do that, and are you glad you did that?
I'm glad I did it, and I did it, I suppose, because of the desire for esteem. I mean, the feeling of authority, and the sense that it wasn't a purely administrative. It wasn't an administrative job that would preoccupy me. It was something I could probably do while remaining, intellectually speaking, scholarly speaking, an academic. And it's it's the top of the pole or whatever. It was rather good to be. I'd also had an unsuccessful bid at the Christ Mastership when Jack retired, and that was a very fraught and peculiar business, which I...
Maybe more so than all those previous ones documented so famously.
Only because there were more people involved, it was messier. I mean, as the Masters, as you know, had only had whatever it was, half a dozen electors or 13 or something. But this had 30 or 40 electors, so it was a problem of circulation. And there was a bit of fancy footwork that I didn't much admire. But that's all right. Because they did elect, before I was a candidate, they elected, now I've forgotten his name, he was the British ambassador first in Germany and then to America, Oliver Wright. And he was elected, but then the Falklands War broke out, and Mrs. Thatcher wafted him off to America, and so he withdrew, and there was another election. And my opponent in the election, Hans Kornberg, not unnice man, his supporters, let us say, circulated a note immediately before there was any other candidate asking people to commit themselves to him, which enough did to sew up the election. In the event to sew up the election, it was still a contest, and I was run, but not very successful. Well, almost successfully, but not quite. Anyway, so I failed at that, and then within 2 or 3 months, the St Catherine's thing came up, and I was very happy to put in for it. I knew one or two people there, John Tonson and Christopher Bailey, and I knew of it quite well. So I was happy to do that, and
you enjoyed it.
Enjoyed it, and also enjoyed discovering a new level of life. I mean, a new authority, I suppose, a new type of authority. Really. Yeah.
Did your wife enjoy it?
She did in the event. I say in the event because in the middle of the Christ election, which I'd rather gone in for without much consultation inside the family, she confessed that she had once stood outside in the rain the gates of the Master's Lodge and looked in and wondered what the future might hold for her. And I realised then that this had been a very unfair way of proceeding, that she was tagging along. Whereas in the St Catherine's case there was a lot of consultation, and she thoroughly enjoyed we went out of our way to make it a proper lodge, and she entertained people, and we devised things like when there was the annual Ramson dinner, she would invite all the wives to come and eat in the lodge and throw it open things, and we entertained students. Yeah, she liked that very much. And that, from that viewpoint, was very successful. And I think people sometimes remember her more fondly than they remember me.
Has she played any part, I mean she obviously has, but any very direct part in your academic life? I mean, does she read your... She
did. She died... The wife I'm referring to died in 2002. She did. I discussed a lot of things with her, and she actually helped me as a research assistant for a bit in looking at journals and stuff when I was working on policy. And she actually worked a little bit for paid work for Max Hartwell on his social legal work. So she was a great helpmeet from that viewpoint. And sympathetic, and we were close as husband and wives can be, and so I talked a lot with her about the issues that arise, and particularly once I was master of a college, where the nature of one's work is and she was very patient when I made yet another change in 1993 and left it and went to work for Leverhulme. And was very tolerant of my toing and froing on America. The number of times I toyed with and almost moved her along.
well, that takes us to the last phase, which is, well, not the last phase, but another phase, Leverhulme.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, empirically it happened with a phone call from a headhunter, a recruitment firm, saying they were looking for the director and giving me a few names to ask my opinion on. But although I can be foolish, I wasn't foolish enough to think they were doing that purely. And at the end of the conversation, he said, "Would I like to be considered?" And I paused for the necessary half second and said yes. Well, my feeling was that, and it happened in the other sense in which you're asking, in that I'd been, however long that was, 40 odd years in academic life. I'd been a professor, I'd been an administrator, I'd been chair, and I'd always thought that the head of a fairly wealthy academic foundation was a very attractive thing because it didn't have some of the disadvantages, the obligations, the need to carry people along with you, the need to argue about policy a lot, that could happen in a college. Although I was very happy with doing that, I wanted that degree of change. It seemed to me to offer scope for academic contribution, if not direct, but helping other people, and autonomy that didn't necessarily exist in universities. So I always thought that Leverhulme was fun, and my wife reminded me at that point that I'd got a scholarship from Leverhulme. I'd forgotten when I was an undergraduate. Yes. And also Charles Wilson had written the history of Unilever, and Leverhulme was an offshoot of Unilever. In fact, later on I was asked if I wanted to write the fourth volume because they needed to complete it. I didn't. So that was attractive, yeah. And I went in 1993.
And it was good?
It was very good, yeah. It was as I thought. It was a well-endowed foundation with some very liberal businessmen and trustees, willing to both to encourage academic research and also to be receptive to new ideas for types of programs. I soon discovered how pleasant people could be to you if you were head of a research institute. So I didn't generate any enemies, as far as I know. And it gave me an opportunity. I travelled a lot around initially just to see different universities where we helped. And it was busy but not demanding, you know. And I felt very interested both in the variety and the depth of the things I was doing, and got on very well with they were all Unilever board members. That's the nature of the trust. So I got on very well with them, and they were very understanding of academic life. I mean, contrary to what some of my colleagues predicted, I mean, they thought the business firm would be reactionary and illiberal, and they were a bit reactionary, but they weren't illiberal. I mean, in the sense of, So that was I went up in '93. That was 8 years, very happy years. But it had to end because the other thing is, of course, it gave me an extended lease of operations because I went there when I was 62. And it could be for another, as it turned out, 7 or 8 years. So I'd go beyond what would have been the age of retirement had I stayed, and that was very satisfying. Yeah, it was an upheaval because I had to get a flat in London. I mean for pied-à-terre. I stayed in Cambridge as the main house, so I travelled up and down on a weekly basis.
Would you put it on expenses?
No, I didn't. Not the travel, but the pay was very munificent. I can't complain.
This is just an allusion, those watching it, to the MP's expenses. Second homes.
Well, the second home was provided. It's all right. The second home was a tied cottage. I mean, I didn't. Alas, I mean, I'd have been much better off had I bought it. Because the capital appreciation was huge. It was in the Barbican. But they bought me a flat and I lived in it, and then when I left it. You know, so.
Well, there's so many other things, but if I can do a plug for you, your autobiography titled
Doors Open.
Doors Open is available in all good bookshops and certainly on
Well,
Amazon.
it isn't really, because it was privately published, and I'm the originator. I'm the origin of it.
There it is on Amazon at least, and I'm very much looking forward to reading it.
Good.
Thank you very much indeed.
Not at all. Thank you. Glad to have
interview.
participated.